What if God never actually wanted animal sacrifice? Maimonides, the 12th century Jewish philosopher, proposed this idea in a chapter of his famous work, The Guide for the Perplexed. Perhaps God never really wanted a sacrificial system, but only commanded it as a concession to the Israelites. Maimonides argued that in the ancient world, sacrifice was simply how people worshipped. It was normal. It was what the people were used to, and it's how they expected to interact with their gods. He argued that God primarily wanted Israel to reject idolatry. Since animal sacrifice was wrapped up in all the pagan practices of the time, the ideal course of action would have been to outlaw sacrifice altogether. But in the ancient world, this would have been too radical a shift for the Israelites. When Moses is up the mountain for too long, we see how quickly and naturally the people turned to idolatry, making the golden calf and offering sacrifices. That impulse was deeply embedded in the culture. So instead of abolishing the practice, God redirected and restricted it. In other words, the commands relating to sacrifice were given as a concession to the people. Maimonides cites the following passage as an example of God making concessions to support his view. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. The ideal would have been the direct route, but God thought that the Israelites would not be ready for this challenge, and so another route was selected that was within the capacity of the people at that time. The same idea goes for sacrifice, Maimonides argues. If sacrifice is going to be allowed to continue, God is going to tightly control it. This is why sacrifice in the commands of Leviticus can only be done by a certain people, at a certain place, at certain times, and with very controlled and specific procedures. All these restrictions served to limit this kind of worship and keep it within those bounds within which God did not think it necessary to abolish sacrificial service altogether. This is God's concession to a people who would struggle with the idea of a complete outlaw of all sacrifice. And this is why, Maimonides argues, there are so many biblical passages that emphasize righteousness above sacrifice. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for example, that we find in the prophets and Psalms. If people think running the sacrificial system is the goal in and of itself and focus on that above justice, mercy, and the rejection of idolatry, things have gone wrong. This idea put forward by Maimonides is of course only a theory. However, it does have an interesting parallel in the synoptic gospels in relation to divorce, something that is permitted in the Torah. Some Pharisees came to Jesus, and to test him they asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause?" He answered, "Have you not read that the one who made them at the beginning made them male and female? And said, for this reason, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate." They said to him, "Why then did Moses command us to give a certificate of dismissal and to divorce her?" He said to them, "It was because you were so hard-hearted that Moses allowed you to divorce your wives, but at the beginning it was not so." This sounds remarkably similar to Maimonides' idea of divine concession to the human condition. This theory on sacrifice would probably not sit well with some Christians who argue that in the Hebrew Bible, God requires sacrifice to forgive sins. However, in my opinion, that is absolutely not the case. For example, many commentaries on Leviticus have observed that there is no sacrifice available for the most serious, deliberate sins. Therefore, King David, in regards to his murder and adultery, had to offer confession, prayer, repentance, and contrition, as is seen in his conversation with Nathan in 2 Samuel 12 and in Psalm 51. Those are what led to his forgiveness, not a sacrifice. Leviticus chapter 26 discusses that Israel, when in exile due to serious sin, require repentance apart from animal sacrifice, and that God will redeem them when they show contrition. This is a theme taken up in many prophetic books, including Joel, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Hosea, and Amos, with emphasis on repentance and a change of heart being the key factor for forgiveness and restoration, not animal sacrifice. This is only a brief introduction to some of these topics, so I've linked in the description the relevant chapter in the Guide for the Perplexed that you can read online, along with some of those relevant biblical passages from the prophets and Psalms. And of course, this video contains only ideas and opinions, not concrete facts. Maimonides' theory is just that, although to me it is a very interesting possibility. Let me know what you reckon in the comments.